Thanks for checking out this video. I'm going to start this part 2 with the end of part 1, which was the audio comparison between the stock bass drum and the bass drum modified, all other things being the same. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go back and check out part 1. This is an inexpensive bass drum of Luan and basswood construction that I've recorded trying to get the best sound that I could stock and then maintaining everything that I did to the drum, with the exception that I had modified the drum. And so it sounds different than the stock drum, but everything I did to record it and capture it was exactly the same. So here's the comparison, and when you come back, I'll do the big reveal of what I did and talk a little bit about what I learned and what I think it means moving forward. So what did you notice about the differences between the stock and modified drums? It's interesting to me how some of the treatments made the difference pretty obvious, and some of the treatments, muffling that I did, they were a little bit closer. But overall, and really in all the clips, but more obvious in some than others, the sound of the modified drum was just more aggressive overall. It had more attack, it had more snap, it had more high end. The lows were tighter. It wasn't as fluffy sounding. When I was trying to get the best sound out of the stock drum, I wasn't getting what I normally get from a bass drum. I wasn't getting nearly enough attack. And so I went from my usual AKG D112, which is a more balanced, less hyped sound, to the more hyped and snappier Shure Beta 52. And so that really helped to bring out the attack of the drum. However, I still found myself having to push it much further into the drum, closer to the batter head, closer to the beater, than I normally ever would to get the amount of attack that I wanted. Which also meant that that far in, I'm not getting very much of the tone of the drum from the internal mic, so I really had to rely on the external mic to get the tone, which is again not the way I prefer to do it. With the modified drum, I would be much more inclined to pull the mic back out because I had plenty of attack with the modification, and might also go back to the D112 to get a little bit more of a balanced perspective as well. And that would have allowed me to get more low end from the internal mic too and get a more balanced, more natural sound overall. So modification, what did I do? I sprayed 3 coats of clear satin polyurethane inside the drum. I took the hardware off, I sprayed 3 coats of this stuff on, letting it dry or cure in between each coat, and put the thing back together. Why did I do that? Well, back in the 80s, Pearl kind of upped the ante for aesthetics on inexpensive drums by putting a ply of basswood on the inside of the drum, which is a nice looking wood. And up to then, most entry-level drums either had the unfinished Philippine mahogany or luan, which is a very coarse, unattractive wood if it's not finished somehow. Or they would spray paint or like a Zolacoat. Tama used the gray fleck kind of Zolacoat finish on the inside of their Swingstar drums. Once Pearl started putting basswood in, all of a sudden their drums looked more professional and all the other makes followed suit. It looked really great, but to save money, they didn't actually seal the wood. And if you look at actual professional drums, they seal the wood. When I look at inexpensive entry-level drums, regardless of what they're made from, they never have the wood sealed. And so that seal really makes a difference in the reflective character of the inside of the drum shell. Particularly since, certainly up to recently, most of the finish woods used on the inside of inexpensive drums are really soft woods. The Tama Rockstar that I used in this video, that's basswood. Basswood has a Janka hardness of 410. I don't want to get off topic with the Janka scale, but the Janka scale is essentially a hardness scale for wood. So various types of wood have different levels of hardness. The bigger the number, the harder the wood. Basswood has a hardness of 410. Sugar or rock maple, which is the most common tone wood for drum shells, by comparison, has a Janka hardness of 1450. So it's more than 3 times harder. So the harder that wood is, the more reflective it's going to be. So not only is the basswood a softer tone wood than what's typically used in professional drums, but it's not finished on top of that. The softer the wood, the more it absorbs high frequencies particularly. So that's why I'm not getting much of the attack that I wanted out of that drum without sticking the mic way back in there to really bring that out. And you can think, well, Joel, you can just EQ it and just, add the attack and stuff. And that's exactly what I would do if I had to record a stock drum and live with it. That's what I would do to deal with it. But by putting the hard coating on the inside, I actually changed the timbre of the drum. I didn't just EQ it. What that finish did to the drum, you cannot replicate with EQ. EQ changes the amplitude of a given frequency. And that's not what this did. This actually changed the time domain characteristics relative to the frequencies. Having that harder finish on the inside meant that those higher frequencies were bouncing around and they were literally in the shell longer. So it's not even that they were necessarily louder as much as they were there longer. And so they were really easier to perceive. So that's a timbre difference. That's not an EQ difference. It's sort of like the same thing as if you recorded an acoustic guitar and then you put radical EQ on it to make it sound electric. You're pretty much just going to wind up with a radically EQ'd sounding acoustic guitar. But you're not going to wind up fooling anybody into thinking that it's electric unless you go back and do something fundamentally different to the timbre of the guitar itself. Or put another way, take a singer like Steve Perry from Journey. I don't care what mic you use, what signal path you use, how radically you EQ his voice, it's going to sound like Steve Perry. You're not going to be able to make him sound like Perry Como. I kind of like that. Steve Perry, Perry Como. I like that. Perry Farrell? Anyway, you get the point. It's a timbre difference. I actually changed the character of the drum. So some of you are probably going, oh, Joel, you don't put lacquer on the inside of drums. John Good said you don't do that. Yeah, I know. I've seen the video, John Good talking about how they oil the interior of the toms and bass drums from Drum Workshop. And that's totally fine and good. By oil, he's probably, I don't know, if he's talking about tung oil or linden oil or some other sort of typically used oil for sealing and protecting wood. I can pretty much guarantee he's not using a pure tung oil, for example, because it takes days, if not a week, to cure between coats, and with the volume of drums that they're cranking out, they don't got time for that. So they probably have an oil mixed product that has polymers in it, that has curing agents in it to speed the curing and things like that. But it probably has some oil in it too. So yeah, they're sealing the inside of the drums. And that is affecting not just the stability of the moisture content of the drum, which is kind of the idea behind sealing it, but it's actually affecting the timbre too. But not only that, but some manufacturers do go pretty crazy with their interior finishes. For example, this is a Tama Superstar from the mid-80s. It is a gloss lacquer finish on the outside and on the inside. Look at that. See how it reflects? It's shiny. It's not a layer upon layer mirror smooth buffed, but it is a gloss finish that's been applied. You can still see the grain, which is vertical, by the way. That's kind of interesting. Almost all the Tama drums I've ever seen, if not all of them from the 80s, had vertical interior plies. So, you know, that's not just Drum Workshop doing that. And from my personal favorite drum kit that I have, this is a late 70s, find the badge, there it is, late 70s Ludwig. This is the heavy maple, thick maple poplar shell that they made in the 70s. And let me see if I can show you. See, there's a little bit of a sheen on that shell too. See that? It's sealed. Now, I don't know exactly what they used for this, quite honestly. I do know that Ludwig now uses a water-based lacquer to seal the inside of their professional level drums. Now, the ones they make here in America, I know that because I watched a YouTube video, factory tour. So, very cool. Anyway, but all drums are sealed. Now, let's talk real quickly about the ping. I don't tend to have that problem with toms, but I do know exactly in the bass drum what they're talking about. In fact, I did a video many years ago that's called, it's still, you can go check it. In fact, I'll link to it below, called Basic Bass Drum Tuning, I think is what I called it. And that's what it was, basic bass drum tuning. It wasn't how to record a killer bass drum sound. That's not what it was, but I think most people, or a lot of people, thought that that's what I was intending to do, which I did a lousy job if that's the case. As you can see by the vitriol that I've gotten on that, from people who wanted to hear a killer bass drum sound, instead they heard a kind of a pingy sound because the inside of the Ludwig drums are lacquered. It's a hard finish, and when you put two heads on that thing, it's going to tend to kind of ping a little bit. So when I was doing the basic tuning, with the intention of the video being to just get people to a place where they can start worrying about muffling and miking and things like that, but the tuning's pretty much taken care of for probably 90% of pop-related things. But when you do a tuning video, people generally want to go, what does it sound like, right? So I thought, okay, so I'll show people basically what it sounds like, and just stuck a mic on the raw drum, nothing in it, and if you go watch the video, you'll see there's that basketball sound. And I thought that's probably not helpful to people who aren't familiar with miking bass drums. People who are kind of new to it may be turned off by that. And apparently they were. So I went a little further, not trying to get into muffling much, but just to say, by the way, you can reduce that by putting something soft inside. So I put a piece of foam inside that I normally use inside that drum. And it reduced it significantly. And that's actually how I normally tune that drum and how I muffle that drum. 70% of the time probably when I'm recording that drum. I like that drum because it's large and it's resonant and it's aggressive. But I just put the mic kind of just inside the internal mic, just inside the plane of the front head in the hole, and then I use an external mic, and then I balance the two and process and stuff like that. And it's a killer sound, but I didn't do any of that in the video. So it was kind of misunderstood. That's fine. I might go back and address that more, other than what I just now did, in a later video or something. But you do tend to get that pingy sound. However, that pingy sound with just a little bit of muffling to contain it still gives a very aggressive overall presentation. See also the audio at the beginning of this video, because there are a lot of genres of pop music that could really benefit from the additional attack that that gives you. It's a great sound. The point of this video was to see what difference finishing the inside of an unfinished, inexpensive drum would make. Turns out it makes a big difference. One that I think is worth doing. Now, should you run out and spray the inside of your inexpensive drum set, I would suggest caution. I wouldn't do anything that's going to be hard to undo. Actually, I did polyurethane just because I just wanted to see what the difference was going to be. I don't necessarily recommend polyurethane. In fact, this has spawned so many questions in my mind that I'm actually going to continue in future videos exploring this a little bit more, because recently into my possession has come a PDP CX series drum kit, which is maple. It's not basswood and Luan, it's maple. And it is unfinished. Maple's a much harder wood. Remember, I mentioned on the Jenka scale, it's 3 times as hard as basswood. So I would expect that stock, these drums are going to have more high frequency characteristics than a 1980s Tama Rockstar kit would. Nevertheless, I also think that by going in and treating it as I plan to do with a blended tung oil mixture, not pure tung oil, like I say, it takes way too long to cure, but a tung oil based product to just seal the wood, I believe it's still going to harden the overall surface a little bit, and I still expect to hear a change. So that's going to be very interesting, since this is a harder wood to begin with, and I'm not going to do something quite as drastic as spraying it with polyurethane. So although maybe afterward I'll put the poly on, who knows, we'll see what happens. But be looking for that. Hit the subscribe button and click the little bell there so that you can get notifications when I upload new videos. So when I do that one, you'll be sure to see it. I hope this was useful. I think this is a fascinating subject, and the interior hardness of a drum is only one factor of drum sound, and there's so many others, and I want to explore each of them, because I think as producers and as drummers, as people who record drums and use drum sounds in their productions, it's useful to understand the construction of drums, why they sound the way they sound, so that if you have the option, you can choose the right instrument for the sound that you're going for. So thanks for watching. I hope this is interesting. Please share. And please subscribe. I'm trying to grow my channel, and I would appreciate it if you think that what I'm doing is kind of cool. I'd appreciate the encouragement of a subscription and, recommending it to someone. But thanks for watching. I appreciate it. Take care. See you next time.